In this video, you're going to be building Airbnb with Next.js. You're going to be using Solidity to build a contract, and we're going to be using Infura to build this app on the Ethereum blockchain. You will be able to list and rent out your property. You will also be using RainbowKit to connect your MetaMask wallet to the app itself. So without wasting any more time, let's go ahead and get started. As usual, we're going to be using our Clever Programmer CLI tool. And after you pass in your email, then your name, you're going to go ahead and just type in Solidity Airbnb or something along those lines, and it will show up. And then it will start installing everything, and we'll also open up Infura. So go ahead and just create a new key or sign up with them if you haven't done that already, and then just name your key Airbnb and then copy that key, because we're going to be needing that very soon. So at the very top you can see there is API key. Just go ahead, copy it, and then let's move on. In the meantime, our CLI tool will go ahead and open VS Code for your convenience, and you can just go ahead and get started. Now inside there you see there's a couple of files, and that's where we're going to be working. But before we go ahead and get started, just go ahead, open up the terminal. You can just hit Command J and then check out if it runs or if everything is installed correctly. Just run yarn and then npm install just for safety, and then if everything is ready and good to go, you should be able to start this app up by typing in yarn dev, and this is what you will be able to see. So if you got to this point, good job. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so if you've seen that, just go back to your VS Code and now open up a new terminal, or you can just stop running the app and then just type in Truffle in it. That will initiate your Truffle project, which we'll be using throughout this project. So now go into your contracts folder and create an Airbnb.sol file. That's where we will be writing the contract itself. And under that, in migrations, a 01_deploy.js file will help you later in the build deploy the contract itself. So let's go ahead and create the instance of the Airbnb artifact, and then this deployer function will help you actually deploy this contract. So just type in module exports function deployer and then deployer.deploy Airbnb, and then you can just forget about this file for the rest of this build, because we're not going to be typing here anything else anymore, I believe. And one more setup thing that we need to do is just go into your Truffle extension. If you haven't installed it already, it's available for free in the VS Code marketplace, and then just double check that under Infura service you actually do see Airbnb. If you do not, this is how you connect. Just hit connect, hit the three dots, hit connect to network, and then inside, and then just select Infura, and under that your projects will be listed, and then just select Airbnb. If your projects are not listed, you will need to sign in, but it's a piece of cake. And once you see Airbnb there, you are good to go, and we can go ahead and get started writing the contract. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the Solidity contract. So first things first, we're gonna have to specify the SPDX license identifier, which is going to be MIT in this case. It's an open source project. Then we're going to be specifying the Solidity version, which is 0.8.16. If you're on a different version, I recommend you switch to 0.8.16, otherwise there might be compatibility issues. Next up, we're going to start the contract, which is going to be an Airbnb obviously, and we're going to have a couple of global variables in here. The first one is going to be owner, which is going to be a public address. Then we're going to have a counter, which is going to be a public number, and we're going to have rental IDs, which is going to be an array of numbers, again public. Now we're going to set up the constructor here, and the counter is going to start at 0, and then the owner will always start at message sender. So with that, let's move on to property info struct. Now we're going to be setting that up right here. It's going to be a struct, as I said, and it's going to have a couple of things. So it will have an owner, it will have a guest, those are going to be addresses, and then it will have a name, obviously a string, a property address, which is again going to be a string, a description, again string, and an image URL, which we're going to be stored as a string here, and we're going to have a booking starts at, which is going to be a number. These are going to be dates, obviously that are going to be a booking ends at, so this is what we're going to be checking later on. And we will have a price per day, and then of course we're going to have an ID, and a boolean, which is going to be checking whether, or which is going to be storing whether the property is booked or not. Now, next up, let's go ahead and set up an event, which is going to be called property listed, and it will have a couple of properties. So name, property address, description, and image URL. And then we're going to be also having the price per day, ID, and there's an error, which I'm not, okay, it's gone. So that's good. So that was probably a bug. And then we're going to have another event, which is going to be property booked event. And then we're going to be storing the ID, guest, number of days, price, and these properties in it. So these two are basically just console logging, but on the blockchain. So let's move on to mapping the properties. Now we're going to go ahead and create a mapping, and we're going to be mapping numbers to a property info. And this is going to be called public properties. All right, now let's go ahead and build the list property function. So first of all, we're going to have a couple of things that we're going to be passing in here: the name, property address, description, image URL, price per day. And so these will be the stuff that we will be using to run this function. This is going to be a public function, by the way. And we're going to go ahead and create a new property variable that is going to be local only. And we're going to be storing that in the properties array at the counter index. It will have a couple of, it will obviously have every single, and we're going to go ahead and assign values to each key. So we're going to say the new property name equals name, and we go through the entire thing: description, image URL, price per day. The ID is going to be the counter. We're going to have the is booked. It starts with false, and then the booking starts at, and the ends at dates will be initially 0. The owner is going to be message sender, and then the guest is going to be address 0, which is just basically a plain 0x000 address that is just like an address 0. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be storing the counter. So now that it exists, we're going to be storing it in the rental IDs array. So we're going to push it there. Now, this is an optional step, but since we created all the events, now let's go ahead and emit the property listed event and then pass in all the required arguments. So name, property address, description, image URL, price per day, and counter, and then increment the counter. Okay, it says the property listed event is an undeclared identifier. Oh, that's because I didn't call it, or I didn't name it properly initially. So let's just fix that. And that is pretty much this section. All right, now let's go ahead and test our newly written function. So what we're gonna do is, if you don't have it already, just install the Remix IDE extension and then set the compiler version to match the contract version, and then just hit run deploy, and then hit activate. Now that will pop this window open, and then try to connect to the blockchain. But there's a big chance that it cannot connect to it because we probably don't have Ganache running. So just open your Ganache, copy your RPC server port, and then you can obviously put in your Infura link as well. For development purposes, it's easier to just use Ganache for now, and then when you deploy it, you just deploy it using Infura. And so you just change the port, and once you're good, just hit connect, and there are all your wallets and everything. So now just hit compile on the contract, and then you can go ahead and hit deploy as well. Now we'll flash a little bit, and then you will be good to go. You can call the counter, it should say 0, and then you just basically run through all the functions, try listing a property with whatever dummy data you want, and then see what's happening. Now, the one thing that I'll say though is if you try to put in the price in ETH or any kind of like non-whole number, like 0.001, that's not going to work. It can only work with integers. So what you want to do is go to this ethconverter.com website, and then whatever price you imagine in Ether, just convert it to weight and then put that number in there, and that should work. And now if you call the properties function, you should get back all the details, and that's pretty much it. All right, so let's go ahead and build now the book property function. So That will have a couple of arguments. So property ID, a start date, and they just pass those in. This will be a public payable function because there's going to be actual transaction that's going to be happening in this function. And so what we're going to do initially is we're going to calculate the number of days using this easy, nice little formula. And so what's going to happen is on the front end, we're going to be passing in end date and start date as milliseconds. So here we actually have to calculate that in, because that's how JavaScript works. And then here we just have to turn it into, what is it, actual days. So we're going to be let's see how much 1 day is in milliseconds, and that's the number right there, that 86.4 and a bunch of zeros. Pause it here, copy it over. I'm not gonna say it out because I can't even count how much that is. All right, give me a break, I'm old. So just put it there, divided by whatever number comes out, and then after that what we're gonna do is, now that we have the number of days and we know based on the property ID how much this property costs per day, we're going to make sure that the user is sending enough ETH. So we're going to be using the properties map, or the properties mapping, to calculate that. So we're going to say number of days times the price per day for that specific property, and then that has to be less than the message value. So basically the amount of ETH that the user is sending. If not, we're going to have to reject it with a send more ETH or whatever error message. And then here we're going to say payable, properties, property ID owner. So basically all the ETH that is getting sent to the contract will be transferred over to the owner, and the entire thing. And then we're going to set the is booked element of the property, of the specific property, to true, so that others cannot book for the same period. And then we're going to save the start date and the end date, and then obviously the guest as well. And then we're going to go ahead and run the property booked event, and we're going to emit it. And that is basically the function. All right, so now that we've wrote this function, let's actually go ahead and test it. So the usual method, just open up the Remix ID extension, and then you're going to go ahead, rebuild and redeploy the same contract. And so you will see version 2 right there. So you can remove version 1, and there it is. And now what you want to do is, because it's a new, you will have to list the new properties. So just pop in whatever values you want to. Basically, you just want to have one property there. Just test that it still works. Nothing has broken. And now we're going to be testing the booking. So you will need 2 dates in like millisecond ISO format. And so here's the 8th, and so I'm just gonna copy that, but you can just go to this same website and then use whatever dates you want to. Just put a start date and put an ending date there, and then if you just try to run this function right now, you should see an error. So that error is good because we actually haven't sent any to this right now. So for now, just whatever value you want to pop in there, but you should technically be calculating how much it costs per day, and you just put in whatever value that you like, make sure that is more than the initial value or the price that you would need to pay, and then just hit call, and you should now see your wallet address at both the owner and the guest properties. And you should also see that the 10th argument, which is booked, that should be true. So with that said, if you see all those things, then you're good to go. Now let's go ahead and set up the wallet connection for our app. So we're going to be using WagMe and RainbowKit and all these things with it. So let's go ahead and import rainbow-me /RainbowKit/style CSS, and then chains, configure chains, create client, and WagMe config from WagMe, and then get default wallets, RainbowKit provider, dark theme. Obviously you don't have to import dark theme, but it looks better, from rainbow-me /RainbowKit, and then the Infura provider from WagMe provider Infura. And later in the video I'll be fixing that typo, but that is actually providers with an S at the end, so plural. And then the same for JSON RPC provider, chains. And then okay, so let's go ahead and set up chains and the provider. So we're going to be using configure chains, and then just pop in a array of chain.girly and chain.localhost. So what we're going to be doing here is just all the different chains that this application will be able to connect to. And for each of them, there's going to be 2 providers that we're going to be setting up. So we're going to be using Infura to connect to Girly, and then we're going to be using Ganache to connect to the local chain. So for Infura, we need to pass in the Infura API key. I hope you still have it copied on your clipboard. And then the Infura provider will be treated with higher priority. So let's grab the API key again if you don't have it. So just copy that and then create an .env file, put it in there. And then just make sure that the names match up. So Infura _ API key or whatever you want to, but you got to make sure they line up between the app.js file and the env file. Otherwise, there will be an error. And then for JSON RPC provider, you need to put in obviously priority number 2, but you can just skip that. And then you have to configure the RPC itself, because Infura comes with the RPC, but not with the API key. The JSON RPC provider is completely custom. So for RPC, just say chain and then HTTP 127.0.0.175.45. Basically, it's your local host. And then just copy the link over from Ganache. And then we're going to create a connectors from get default wallets. And then you just configure it with whatever app name you want to. Pass in chains and then create a WAGMI client. And then just make sure the auto connect is true. That way the wallet will be connected automatically. And then pass in the connectors and the provider. Now you want to go down and wrap the component between the WAGMI config, passing client, and the WAGMI client, and then wrap Rainbow Kit provider around the component as well. And then that should be pretty much it. Now, here's the fix that I was talking about. So just that's the error that's going to cause. So just make sure the Infura provider and the JSON RPC provider, you fix that, and then put in the plural, and that should be now good. And now if you go over into header, you will want to import connect button from Rainbow Kit, and then all the way at the bottom, just render out connect button, and that should show up right now, and it should be working. So if you disconnect or whatever your wallet, now you will be able to connect and use the Rainbow library to connect your wallet to your app. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on. All right, so now let's go ahead and using the WAGMI library, we're gonna be saving the address of the user who connected their wallet. So we're gonna import use account from WAGMI and then just extract address out of it, and that will take care of literally everything for us. And every time that address changes, we're gonna want to run a use effect that makes sure that the address actually exists, meaning there's a wallet connected to the app, and then we're going to be saving that address in our set user address use state on the user address use state. Just to make sure it works, you can go ahead, console log it, and then you can run a couple of tests. There it is, there's my address connected, and then if you change it to a different wallet, it should update and show you a different address. Now, next up, what you want to do is go ahead, create a new folder called utils. And inside there, we will create a constants.js file. So in here, we're going to be importing the contract from Airbnb.json. And don't worry about it, we haven't put it in here yet. So we're going to put it in just a second. And then we're going to import Web3 from the Web3 package. And now we're going to go ahead and save the address of the deployed instance of this application. However, we haven't deployed it yet, so let's go ahead and do that right now. Just go ahead and right click on your Airbnb.sol and click deploy. And then now you want to go ahead, select Girly, because we're on the Girly network, and use Infura. There's your link, so just double check that it's there. And using Infura, just go ahead and deploy this contract. And in a little bit, it should show up your freshly deployed, nice little warm and toasty contract address. So just pop that over there. And now you want to go ahead and export a create contract function. So all that's going to do is it will extract the Ethereum object from window. And then using that, it will create a new contract. So we'll say new web3.eth.contract and then passing the API and then the address. So now let's actually put in the API in the same folder. So inside of build/contract, there's the Airbnb.json file. That's the API. So we just want to go ahead, copy that, and then paste it into utils. And there it is. Now you will be able to import it. Now there's one thing that was supposed to be there, but for some reason it got deleted, as a modal styles will be, it's not really a blockchain related stuff, but it's just some styles that got deleted. So just copy whatever I'm typing there. So it'll be modal styles and then content, 300 pixels height and then 400 pixels wide, margin auto, margin top 150 pixels, and then display flex. And then for overlay, it'll be a 000 and then 0.7 RGBA. That's whatever. That's fine. Just copy that and then you should be. And now what you're going to do is go back into your use Airbnb.js file and then import the create contract function that we just created in constants.js. And right here in the use effect, you want to set the contract and then put the create contract function in there. Just make sure you put the open and closing brackets there so that it actually runs. And so with that said, that should be good. All right, let's go ahead and fetch all the properties. None of them are going to show up because we don't have any, but let's still do it. So we're going to have a function, get properties is going to be an async function because we are handling blockchain stuff. And in there, we're going to have a try catch. If it goes on error, we're just going to console log it, and I'm going to worry about error handling for now. And in the try, we're going to have a number of properties, which is basically just going to fetch the counter from the contract. So you can go back and check what that does, but basically it's just a number that counts how many properties we have. And so once that's done, we're going to go ahead and set the properties use state to an empty array. You will see in a little bit why. And so what we're going to do is now we're going to loop through all of the properties, but the way we're going to be doing it is we're going to have to fetch individually each and every single apartment. So what we're going to do is go from index 0 all the way to a number of props, and we're going to call the contract that methods properties. We're going to basically fetch from the mapping every single property, and whatever we get back, we're going to need to format it because the blockchain sends back a bunch of random stuff with the useful information. So we're going to have ID, name, we're going to have description, we're going to have price per day, we're going to have is booked, and we're going to have address, I believe. And you will later see it, but I forgot to import img URL. So go back, copy that from the contract, and then just paste it here. It will save you a little bit of a headache later, but I'll show you that anyways. And now what you're going to do is append the formatted property to the current state of the property's use state. Now what you want to do is create a use effect that runs every time the contract changes, and then that use effect will run the get properties function. So every time a new contract is loaded up, we will be fetching all the properties that are, and then go ahead, console log it, and if you get a empty array, good job. Now let's go ahead and implement the add listing function so we don't just get an empty array. So we're going to say const add listing equals, it will be an async function, and we'll need to pass in name, property address, description, image URL, price per day to it. And what we're going to do is, obviously, if the contract exists, we're going to have a try catch, and we will be calling the contracts methods list property function, and then pass in everything that so name, property address, description, image URL, and price per day. And then we're going to be sending that from the address that is logged in to the app. For gas, we can just pass in like 3 million, and then gas limit null, and then just go from there. Once we added a new property, you want to refresh the properties. So just run get properties function, and to be able to use this function outside of this hook, you will want to go ahead and export that or return it. So let's see if it works. So I'm just gonna click it and something seems off. So let's see what's up with onCreate. It seems like it's not defined. Let's define it. So inside of new listing form.js, let's create that function. And you want to prevent default so that the page doesn't reload itself. And then what we're going to do is we're going to calculate how much the price per day is in weight. Because if you remember, the contract only works with weight. So we can use the Web3. We can use the Web3 library to do that. So Web3.toWeight, and then pass in price per day, and then the original type is Ether. And so after that, you can just run add listing, pass in everything that it requires, and now with the newly calculated price in weight. And now that should be good to go. So now it should work. So let's just test it. Just some dummy data, upload an image. Perfect. And let's go pay for it. And as you can see, now it was successful. I'm gonna refresh, and it looks like the address is not defined. So let's see what's happening with that. Listing item, we need an address. Oh yeah, we gotta import it. So let's just do that real quick, and then the structure from user Airbnb. Okay, that looks good. And now it looks like the image is not loading for whatever reason, and it says the source is missing. However, the source is clearly there, so that can only mean one thing, and that means that when we are pulling in from the contract, we are not actually destructuring it. So we just confirm that with a console log. So let's actually do that. This is what I was talking about. So just put it there, fetch the image URL, and that should solve the issue. Now it shows up twice, but if you refresh it, will only show up once, and the app is good to go. Now we only have to book the property, and we are ready with this app. Okay, so the very last thing now that we need to do is being able to book the property. So let's go ahead and go through that, and we're done with this build. So in the user Airbnb, we're going to create a new function that we'll call book property, and it will be an async function with the arguments ID, start at, and end at. So first we're going to check if we have a contract and everything's ready to go on the blockchain side, and then we're going to be running a try catch just to keep things safe. Now we're going to have to check what the due price is, and we're going to be using the contract for it. However, we haven't made that function on the contract end. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's go in there, and in Airbnb SOL, we're going to create a new function, get due price, and we're going to pass in 3 arguments: ID, start date, and end date. It will be a public view function that will return a number. So first what we're going to do is we'll get the property from the properties mapping using the ID. Then we're going to calculate how many days the guest would like to stay using the same exact function formula that we already used. And we're going to be returning the number of days time the price per day. So basically the total due price. That's all the function will do. And then we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and redeploy this function. The reason is every time you change something on the blockchain, you will have to redeploy it. So that comes with having to update the contract address and the ABI as well. So go back into your Next.js in the URLs, and then just update the address const. And now we're going to go ahead, remove the original Airbnb JSON, and then replace it with the new ABI. So once all that is done, we will have the due price. And now what we're going to do is using the book property function in the user Airbnb hook, we're going to go ahead and book it. We pass in all the required data. So from user address and then value due price, because now we have it. So that way there will be no overpayment, underpayment, no errors there. And pass in the required gas limits. And then once you book the property, you want to refresh the page. So just run get properties, and you should be good to go. And here are the start date, end date, use states, and everything that is being run in the booking model is just to show that this is how the other side of the app works. All right, let's go ahead and now test it. So we're going to add a new listing just like we did last time. So all right, let's get all of it done. And as you can see, it shows up perfectly. And now let's go ahead and book it, and let's see what happens. So this is a perfect nice little modal. So let's just book 3 days and hit confirm. And it looks like book property is not a function, and it doesn't exist. And that is likely because we haven't exported it from the hook. Let's go try it again. And now it seems like it's going through, and contract interaction is pending. As you can see, the moment it's done pending and you refresh the page, the property will be unavailable. So that is it. That is the app. Now go ahead and feel free to build on top of it, add new features to it. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.